So one of the things that is really creepy about actually holding a human skin book is that they look like any other antique book on the shelf. It's almost like this creepy secret that the book has. It can be any color, any kind of texture, any kind of book covering you can think of.
This librarian has an interesting hobby.
My name is Megan Rosenblum. I'm a librarian at UCLA Library, and I wrote the book Dark Archives, a librarian's investigation into the science and history of books bound in human skin. We created something called the Anthropodermic Book Project to see how many books we could find in public libraries and museums around the world and test them to find out for the first time in history whether they were real human skin or if they were just other animals. Thus far, the Anthropodermic Book Project has been able to identify about 50 alleged human skin books in public libraries and museums. When people hear there are books bound in human skin and they were real, it's very understandable from our modern perspective that you think, who are the worst monsters in history, serial killers or Nazis? But we do not have any alleged books from that era so far to test.
Rosenblum says most of the books bound in human skin came from doctors in the 19th century.
The College of Physicians of Philadelphia has the largest collection of confirmed human skin books in the world right now. They have 5. 4 of them were made by one doctor named John Stockton Huff. The other book there was made by a Dr. Joseph Leidy roughly around the same time period, and he took the skin from a Civil War soldier he was dissecting during the war and used the skin to bind the anatomy book that he wrote himself. There are also multiple copies of what's called the Dance of Death. So they were 19th century copies of a book that actually started in the Middle Ages. And it's sort of this moralizing tale around death that shows that death comes for us all. There are a lot of medical books. Maybe a doctor, bibliophile, book lover, bound his favorite book in skin.
The ghoulish phenomenon says a lot about medicine in the 1800s.
Doctors started seeing their patients a little bit differently. So if you see a whole lot of patients and you're exploring them on these new sort of points of view, you can kind of lose sight of who they are as a person and start seeing things as diseases to be cured, problems to be solved. And if you lose sight of someone's humanity like that, it can lead to what we call depersonalization. And that way of looking that's special to doctors of this time is called the clinical gaze. And all of these things together led to a situation where real human skin books were made in the US and in Europe, where people were doctors and book collectors, and they were doing dissections, and they didn't see anything wrong with just taking a piece of skin from the dissection and using it to bind their favorite book. Something that's really hard for us to imagine today, but that's part of what makes this dark history so fascinating.
So how does Rosenblum's team determine what a book's made of?
Everyone thinks that you can use DNA on everything. There are certain things it doesn't quite work for, and testing these leather books is one. One of the reasons why is because DNA degrades really quickly after death. These books are mostly about 200 years old. But even worse than that is that the process of taking skin and making it into leather is a very chemically destructive process, and it pretty much destroys all the DNA. The scientific process we use to determine whether something is made out of human leather or another animal's leather is called peptide mass fingerprinting. So we take a teeny tiny little piece of the leather and we put it in a tiny little test tube, and we put this enzyme in it and we run it through a machine called a mass spectrometer. All it tests is what it's made of, not maybe what's on it. And it shoots out this graph. Each animal has a different graph. So if you look at a certain graph, you can tell that's a sheep. Or you can look at a graph and say, oh, that's from the great ape family, which is how we would know it's human.
If you have a book that you think might be people, Rosenblum wants to hear from you.
Anyone who has a book that has a note inside that says it's bound in human skin, or you work in a library that long had this book that everyone talked about, people could always contact the Anthropodermic Book Project. You could go to anthropodermicbooks.org and send a message and give us a bunch of details, and then we can send along information for what it would take to get tested if people want to go that route.
This is Inside Edition Digital.